Hello, and welcome to the land use element for the General Plan 2045. My name is David Loya. I'm the Director of Community Development with the City of Arcata, and I'm making this video in preparation for our study session for October. I hope you find it informative. The land use element is the element in the general plan that regulates the overall development pattern for the City of Arcata. It identifies the land uses that are allowable in one area and not allowable in another. It identifies areas set aside for residential versus those set aside for industrial versus those set aside for recreational and natural resources protection. The important figure in the land use element is the land use map. This establishes the designations that identify those land uses. And what I'm showing you here is the proposed amendment map that identifies the prior zoning or land use designations, if you will, and the proposed future land use designations. This map was approved by the Planning Commission for recommendation and has been subsequently updated at least one time. You're seeing the updated map. Some of the content that I'll show you in terms of the policy has not yet been updated because this is all going on concurrently. But I wanted to share with you sort of the how the land use element works and how it's used to regulate development in the city of Arcata. We're presenting this particular element because it has one of the strongest abilities to dictate where and how we can produce housing, which is, of course, a critical concern for the City Council and the City of Arcata. Before we dig into the detail, I want you to take a broad brush look at this. Now, we're not looking at these specific designations. I don't want you to squint to look at the titles here. I just want you to take it in overall. What you'll see is the greens and blues are natural areas. The area that is not designated outside those, for instance, in here, you're seeing the city boundary as the hashed line. The bay isn't designated. We don't have a land use designation for the bay, for example. But the majority of the city of Arcata, you can see, is in these non-designated or greens and blues. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but I want you to think about that when we're looking at this. So paired with this map are a series of tables and policies that establish what the allowable uses are. So I'm just grabbing the residential land use classifications here so you can take a look at that. And we have residential very low, residential low, residential medium, and residential high. And you can see that this table establishes the different uses that are allowable within those districts. We do the same thing for commercial districts and industrial districts, really identifying how the differences will be played out in policy level. There's another layer that we identify in the zoning ordinance, and that's a more refined, a more specific type of resolution than you'll get in the general plan. But the general plan is intended to give you this higher level understanding of the types of land uses that are allowable in these different districts. Wanted to zoom in here and give you that the titles of these different districts in a little more higher resolution so that you can see again that agricultural exclusive, all these green areas, the public facility and natural resource lands take up quite a bit of the city's area. In fact, of approximately the 11 square miles that the city encompasses, only about approximately half are in urban development. The other half are in natural resources. That's a rough number. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is that the proposed changes, which you can see indicated by these different exhibit indicators, and we're not going to go into the exhibits in this. I will have those available for review at the study session, and the Planning Commission has reviewed these in detail. But these are all concentrated within sort of the urban core, if you will. We do have some residential areas, out Sunnybrae and Old Arcata Road, here, but those are for the most part lower density. And the real action in this story is happening right in the urban core, right along downtown up into the Valley West area. Also within these areas, we have the infill opportunity zones that were identified in the 2019 housing element. You saw there the Gateway area, the downtown, the Craftsman's Mall, and the Valley West infill opportunity zones in sequence. And we'll take a closer look at each of those in turn, but I just wanted to point out that our land use map really recognizes these infill areas and the infill strategies, as does the rest of the general plan. So taking a look at the downtown area, we have the commercial central in red surrounding the plaza. So this is really our downtown core. And you could see that that is included with the Uniontown Shopping Center in an infill opportunity zone shown in this thick black line here. We also have just immediately adjacent to the west, the Gateway area, but we're not going to concentrate on that in this presentation, since that has its own discussion going on. But you also see that there are, within these exhibit callouts, several indicators showing that, for instance, residential high is going to central commercial on this parcel. Sometimes it's a group of parcels, such as exhibit 10, which would have shown commercial general and residential medium going to commercial mixed. These are all recommendations of the Planning Commission incorporated into this map at this time. Not inside of an infill opportunity zone, but also an important area for infill development is our Northtown area, which currently is designated and zoned commercial general. The proposal is to make this commercial mix. In fact, the Planning Commission has recommended eliminating commercial general altogether and replacing it with other commercial uses, either commercial central, if you're in the downtown, or commercial mixed use, to really emphasize the idea that we want a mix of uses in these areas. They've blended the use categories between commercial general and commercial mixed use to ensure that we're not losing any of the use types that we want. But all of these will be identified as commercial mixed use that were formerly commercial general. Moving into the central part of town, here's the Alliance and Spear. Just to orient you, this blue dashed line is the coastal zone boundary. And this area west of that line is in the coastal zone. So you'll see we have several zoning districts, lower density residential very low and low, going to residential medium as recommended by the Planning Commission. This modification will require certification by the Coastal Commission. So we'll have to, after we take this first step of updating the general plan, and then after we take the next step of updating the zoning, we'll have to go in and apply for an update to our local coastal program as well. So several steps to implement this vision, but that's this is the first step. We see this in other parts of town as well. In fact, in the Gateway area and in the downtown infill opportunity zones, each of those has a portion in the coastal zone as well, and each of those will have to go through the subsequent approval processes as well. So this area you can see is densifying from residential low to residential medium under this proposal. Moving over to the St. Louis overcrossing here, you see, here's West End Road and the Craftsman's Mall right in the center here. This is an area that's been proposed to go from a variety of different industrial and residential low and residential medium zoning types to residential high north of the Craftsman's Mall. All of that would be residential high. And south of Craftsman's Mall would be going to residential medium. Now, this is originally proposed for all residential high, and the neighbors came and spoke to the Planning Commission before they made the recommendation and compelled the commission to go with residential medium in the southern portion. Moving on to the north part of town, here's Giantoli, Highway 101 and 299. And you'll see the Valley West infill opportunity zone, again here outlined in the heavy dark line. This area is proposed to have zoning go from a variety of commercial, visitor serving, and commercial general and industrial to commercial mixed. Again, trying to emphasize the opportunity for housing development in these commercial mixed zones. So I just want to shift a little bit and show you some numbers, how the city is split up in these different land use types. I'd mentioned earlier that a large portion of the city is in other zoning types like industrial that don't allow for housing development. The area that is dedicated specifically to housing, the residential zoning districts, comprise 27% of the total land area in the city of Arcata. And I want you to note that the majority of that, about 20%, is in residential low and residential very low density. So we have a large portion of our city that is in other land use types, and a large proportion of the area that's in residential types or in low density residential types. And so this was something that the Planning Commission focused on when trying to emphasize infill as a strategy in the city of Arcata. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. One way they did that, though, was by increasing the ability to build housing in other areas. So there's about 4.6% of the land area that is in other zoning types, commercial zoning types, or the gateway zoning type that would allow for housing as well. 1.8% of that is in the gateway, the remainder in these other zoning types under the proposal. Now, it's important because the areas that are in these other zoning types some of them are rezoned to add more area to that land use type. And so it's important to recognize that that's a specific strategy on how we get infill development, is by increasing the number of parcels that are in these mixed zoning types. But altogether, you're looking at a complete, between these other zoning types and residential zoning types, of around 32% of the land area is in a zoning type or a land use designation type that would allow for housing development. Now, how do we increase density given that? So looking at our residential land use classifications, again, looking back at this table, I want to point out one of the things that we did to increase the opportunities for housing was by increasing the total density, or at least the residential medium and residential high zoning districts. Currently, residential medium caps out at 15 units per acre. We're proposing to make that 25 units per acre. And the residential high density caps out at 32 units per acre, and the proposal is to make that 50 units per acre. Now, it's important to note that there hasn't been a whole lot of new residential high density properties that are being created or added to the housing stock in this general plan update. There's a fair amount of residential medium. You saw the properties on Spear and Alliance going to residential medium. So there's a fair amount of opportunity there for new sites. But really, this is a concentration on infill densification. So if you have an apartment complex and a residential high density property, you may be able to take some area that you weren't able to develop before and build on that. We have a couple of landowners who are looking at that. Or in the residential medium, where we've created new residential medium, you'll be able to develop at higher densities than you would have otherwise been able to. We didn't change the residential very low or the residential low density types. Residential very low occupies a fairly significant proportion, almost 10% of the city's area. And so that may be a conversation for future councils, but we're attempting to meet our housing needs just through these other changes that we're proposing. And in the residential low density zoning types, the density range there is really about subdivision. So it's up to 7.25 units per acre once you have a subdivision. Once it's been subdivided, that 7.25 units per acre gets you to about 1 unit per 6,000 square foot parcel to begin with. And it's important to note, as the note on the bottom of this table says, that doesn't include things like state accessory dwelling unit law or density bonus law that may come. It also doesn't include the new small lot subdivision or SB9 subdivisions that are allowed for in residential low density properties. And so we're concentrating densification in residential low based on state density law, and we're concentrating our higher densities in residential medium and residential high in properties that we've got zoned using local law. The other way that we're proposing to meet the housing challenge into the future is by making commercial mixed-use development more flexible and to add density to this district. And so here's an example of a policy in the land use element LU3C, and this has been modified slightly by the Planning Commission in a recent meeting, but the thing I want to draw your attention to here is that the proposed density is 50 units per acre in commercial mixed. Currently, it's tied to commercial medium, residential medium densities, and so this would put it at 50 units per acre instead of 15 units per acre. The other thing that we're having the conversation around is when we get to the zoning, which will detail the more specific implementation of these policies, is to change those zoning standards to make them more flexible. Some examples of the conversation to date is to minimize the requirements for commercial or potentially even eliminate the requirements for commercial in these commercial mixed use zones, recognizing that if you require a component of commercial and there's not a market for it, then you're not going to get the housing that would be allowable otherwise. Minimize parking requirements and allow flexibility of uses. Now, these are concepts that we've been talking about for a couple of years now with the Gateway area as a way to incentivize development of these properties. And then, lastly, for today's topic, we've been talking about adopting more form-based codes throughout the city and making development more predictable and understandable to both the public and the developers, streamlining the process and allowing for more incentive to develop these lands. So that is a quick synopsis of what's going on in the land use element. The reason why this is particular importance to the decision makers at this time is because of the emphasis on densifying within the downtown core or the central core urban areas of the city of Arcata. Looking forward to our conversation. I hope this has helped advance it.